the Unrest stop. It was one of those cross-country road trips you see in movies, except there was no montages or upbeat soundtracks. Just me, my sister Amy, and our mom, crammed into an old sedan with luggage piled high in the back seat. We were making good time, considering. The endless stretch of highway under the starlit sky seemed to merge past with the present, a monotonous blend of anticipation and weariness. We'd been on the road for what felt like eternity, chasing the horizon across state lines. It was late, well past midnight, but we were stubborn or maybe just too wired on gas station coffee and the thrill of adventure to call it a night. That's when the fuel gauge decided to nudge towards E, a silent reminder that even in the vastness of our journey, practical needs couldn't be ignored.
There's a rest stop coming up,
Mom said, peering over her glasses at the GPS.
It looks like it's the only one for about 200 miles.
Her voice had that tone of finality, the one she used when decisions were no longer up for debate. Amy and I exchanged a glance in the rearview mirror. We both needed a break, even if neither of us wanted to admit it. The rest stop appeared out of nowhere, a lone beacon in the darkness. As we pulled in, I couldn't shake off a shiver that crawled up my spine. It wasn't just the chill of the night air. Something felt off. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a van full of teenagers that looked like they were on some sort of road trip, laughing and shouting, oblivious to the eeriness stillness that hung in the air. A small gray compact car was parked at the pump in front of us, a nondescript vehicle that would have been entirely forgettable if not for the two figures standing beside it. The rest stop itself was a relic from another era, with peeling paint and a single flickering neon sign that hummed a low, monotonous drone. It was the kind of place you'd expect to find in the pages of a forgotten roadside atlas, not on a modern journey across the country. The air was thick with the sense of isolation, as if this tiny outpost was disconnected from the rest of the world. As we parked, the van full of teenagers erupted into a cacophony of laughter and chatter, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that enveloped the rest stop. They seemed oblivious to the eerie atmosphere, caught up in the invincibility of youth and adventure, but their presence did little to dispel the growing unease that knotted in my stomach. The two young men by the gray car was another matter entirely. They stood as if carved from stone, their figures illuminated only by the weak overhead lights of the gas station awning. There was something profoundly unsettling about their stillness, a deliberate act that seemed to defy the natural restlessness of life. They weren't just waiting. They were standing guard over something unseen, a secret buried deep within the shadows of the night. As Mom and Amy made their way to the dimly lit interior of the service building, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It wasn't just the two men. It was as if the very air around us was alive with silent observers, hidden eyes that followed our every move. The laughter of the teenagers suddenly cut off, as if someone had flipped a switch, and they hurriedly piled back into their van, their earlier jovialty replaced with whispered urgency. Now, with their departure, the silence felt heavier, more oppressive. It was as if their presence had been the only thing keeping the darkness at bay, and now they were gone. We were left exposed, vulnerable to whatever lay hidden in the stillness of the night. I tried to focus on anything but the dark atmosphere and the unexplained stillness of the two men. I fiddled with the radio, but all I could find was static, a crackling white noise that seemed to fill the car with the sound of distant whispers. I glanced back at the service building, hoping to see Mom and Amy returning, but the door remained closed, a barrier between us and whatever lay inside. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, each second ticking by with agonizing slowness. The rest stop seemed to exist outside of time, a liminal space caught between the mundane and the mysterious. And then, without warning, the two men turned their heads in unison, their gaze piercing the darkness to land squarely on me. A chill ran down my spine, and I knew, with a certainty that left no room for doubt, that we were not welcome here. This was no ordinary rest stop. It was a threshold, a gateway to something ancient and unfathomable. And we had trespassed into its domain, uninvited guests in a world that did not belong to us. The air felt charged, as if a storm were brewing, yet the sky was clear, the stars unblinking in their watch over the world. It was a different kind of storm, one that brewed not in the clouds but in the very fabric of this place, a tempest of shadows and secrets and things best left unexplored. The sudden, frantic opening of the car door shattered the oppressive silence, snapping me back to a terrifying reality. Mom and Amy were back, their faces ghostly pale under the weak glow of the car's interior light. Without a word, they threw themselves inside, urgency and fear etched into every line of their faces.
Drive.
Mom's voice was a sharp command, laced with a terror I'd never heard from her before. I didn't hesitate, didn't ask what had frightened them so badly. The car's engine roared to life under my trembling hands, and we peeled away from the rest stop with a desperation born of pure fear. As we sped away, I dared a glance in the rearview mirror. The two men by the gray car were now turned towards us, their bodies still unnaturally still, but their heads facing our direction. It was their eyes that froze the blood in my veins. They were black, not just the color of darkness, but the absence of light, of soul, of life itself. They were voids, abysses that seemed to pull at the very essence of my being, threatening to engulf us in their unfathomable depths. Amy let out a choked sob from the back seat, her eyes fixed on the receding figures.
Did you see their eyes?
She whispered,
There was nothing there.
voice trembling.
Nothing.
We drove in silence, the only sound the car's engine and the rush of the wind as we pushed it to its limits. The rest stop vanished behind us, swallowed by the night as if it had never existed. But the memory of those void-like eyes lingered, a haunting image that would follow us long after we escaped the physical confines of that place. The miles stretched on, each one taking us further from the rest stop, but no closer to understanding or peace. Questions swirled in my mind, each more unsettling than the last. Who were those men? What had Mom and Amy seen inside the service building to drive them back to the car in such a panic? But the fear in their eyes, the urgency of our escape, told me that some questions were better left unanswered. We drove through the night, the landscape around us blurring into indistinct shapes and shadows. The interstate was deserted, a lonely ribbon of asphalt that seemed to stretch out into infinity. Our headlights carved a path through the darkness, a fragile bubble of light in a world that suddenly felt full of unseen threats. Eventually, the adrenaline that had fueled our flight began to ebb, replaced by an exhausted tension that settled over us like a heavy blanket. We didn't stop, didn't speak, each of us lost in their own thoughts, our own fears. The encounter at the rest stop had changed something fundamental, a loss of innocence or perhaps a realization of the world's hidden depths, of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of the light. As dawn broke, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold, the night's terror seemed to recede, becoming part of a surreal nightmare that lingered at the edge of reality. But the memory of those void-like eyes, the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, remained. It was a reminder that some places, some encounters, are best left undiscovered. That the road holds secrets not meant for the living to know. And as we finally found our way back to the familiarity of daylight, of crowded highways and the mundane concerns of life, we knew that we would never speak of that night, of the vanishing rest stop and the darkness that awaited us there. It was a pact made without words, a silent agreement to leave the shadows undisturbed, to continue our journey with a wary eye on the unseen paths that branched off from our own into realms best left unexplored. The silence that had enveloped us since our frantic escape began to crack as Mom finally spoke, her voice low and strained.
Inside, there was a worker.
She began, her eyes fixed on the road ahead as if she could still see the horrors of the night behind her eyelids.
He was off.
Amy nodded, her arms wrapped around herself as if to ward off a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature.
He kept repeating himself.
She added, her voice barely above a whisper.
Over and over like a broken record.
I glanced between them, the weight of their words heavy in the air.
What did he say?
Not sure if I wanted to hear the answer.
He kept saying, "My mama will like you."
Mom recounted, her voice laced with the disbelief and fear.
At first, I just thought it was some odd joke, but he wouldn't stop. He just kept saying it, staring at us with this empty smile on his face. His eyes were the worst part. They were so intense, like he was looking right through us. And the way he said it, with such certainty, as if he was planning to take us to meet this mama of his.
Amy shuddered. The image sent a shiver down my spine. My mom continued, the memory seemingly making her physically ill.
He was mopping the floor with a dry mop. No water in his bucket, just moving it back and forth over the same spot, all the while saying, "My mama will like you." We tried to leave, to act like we hadn't heard him.
He followed us to the door.
Amy said, her voice tinged with panic.
That's when we ran.
Their words painted a vivid, chilling picture of what had transpired inside the rest stop, adding another layer of horror to our already terrifying experience. The gas station worker, with his bizarre behavior and unsettling repetition, seemed like a specter out of a nightmare, a harbinger of dangers unseen. The encounter left us with more questions than answers. Who was this mama he spoke of? Was he alone, or was there someone or something else lurking within the rest stop? The thought that there might have been more horrors hidden in the shadows of that place, waiting for unsuspecting travelers like us, was enough to make my blood run cold. As we drove on, the daylight did little to dispel the shadow that had fallen over us. The memory of the gas station worker, of his eerie phrases and the unexplained stillness of the two men outside, wove itself into the fabric of our journey, a dark thread in the tapestry of our road trip. We were left with the unshakable feeling that we had narrowly escaped something truly sinister, a fate that lurked just beyond the veil of normalcy. The rest stop, the gas station worker, and the two men with their void-like eyes had become a haunting reminder of the darkness that exists in the unseen corners of the world. A darkness eager to pull us into its depths. The road ahead seemed endless, a path leading away from nightmares into the uncertain light of the day. But the echoes of that night at the vanishing rest stop would follow us, a whispered warning of the mysteries that lie hidden in the heart of the darkness, waiting for the unwary to stumble into their grasp. In the days that followed our harrowing escape, a peculiar obsession took hold of us. We scoured maps and online resources, desperate to locate the rest stop that had been the stage for our nightmare. Yet, no matter how diligently we searched, the place seemed to have vanished into thin air, as if it had never existed outside our collective terror. Mom took to calling the local authorities, inquiring about a rest stop along the stretch of interstate we were sure we had traveled. Each call ended in confusion, with polite but firm assurances that no such place existed.
Are you sure it was on this interstate?
You might be mixing it up with another location.
They'd suggest, their voices laced with barely concealed skepticism. We even reached out to online forums, sharing our story in the hope that someone else might have encountered the same eerie location. But our posts were met with silence, or worse, ridicule. It was as if the rest stop was a figment of our imagination, a shared delusion that refused to be pinned down by reality. The more we searched, the more elusive the truth became. The rest stop, with its flickering neon sign and its unsettling inhabitants, had disappeared not just from the map, but from the world itself. It was as though we had crossed into a parallel dimension that night, one that briefly overlapped with our own before slipping away, leaving no trace behind except the scars it had etched into our minds. Our subsequent trips along the same interstate were marked by a tense anticipation. Each time we approached the area where we remembered the rest stop to be, our conversations would dwindle, our eyes scanning the roadside for any sign of the place that had terrorized us. But there was nothing. Just miles of uninterrupted highway, flanked by the same unremarkable scenery. No hint of the sinister outpost that had seemed so real that night. The mystery of the vanishing rest stop became a shadow that hung over us, a story we hesitated to share for fear of disbelief or dismissal. Yet, it bonded us in a way few other experiences could. We had faced something unfathomable together, survived an encounter that defied explanation. In the absence of proof, our shared experience was the only validation we needed of the reality of that night. As time passed, the edges of the memory began to blur, softened by the mundane realities of life. But certain triggers, a flickering light, the sight of a deserted gas station, a phrase spoken too casually, would send us spiraling back into the heart of that darkness. The rest stop might have vanished from the world, but it lingered in the recesses of our minds, a specter that refused to be exorcised. We were left with unanswered questions. Had we stumbled upon a thin place where the veil between the worlds grows fragile and permeable? Were the men and the gas station worker mere ghosts, echoes of a tragedy bound to that spot? Or had we, in our exhaustion and vulnerability, been touched by something truly otherworldly, a glimpse into the abyss that lies just beyond the corner of our eyes? The vanishing rest stop remains a mystery, a dark enigma wrapped in the shadows of the night. It is a reminder of the unknown that lurks on the fringes of our reality, a tale of terror that whispers of the unseen dangers hidden in the vast, uncharted wilderness of America's highways.